Wrestling fans often talk about the promotional war between the WWF and the NWA. However, what's interesting is that during this time period, there was another promotion that was extremely dominant, but really doesn't get brought up all that much for some reason, even though it predates the WWF and also was said by the WWE to have been the most successful promotion in all of America at one point in time. And so, while there are some out there who think of this as merely the third brand, there are some wrestling fans out there who remember a time when it was once the #1 promotion in all of America, which is exactly why it's the topic of this episode. Because today... Before we begin, I want to give a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters, such as Andy Savardi, Baba Yaga, and Rick Rack. Thank you so much to all of you, it really does make a huge difference. The foundation of the American Wrestling Association all starts with the Minneapolis Boxing and Wrestling Club in 1933. It was ran by promoter Anton Stetcher, who later became a founding member of the National Wrestling Alliance. Eventually, in the mid-1950s, Anton's control would go to his son Dennis and promoter Wally Carbo. Also, around this time, a young amateur wrestler was beginning to gain national popularity after his appearances on the Dumont Network and wrestling for the Olympics in the very same year that the NWA was formed. This level of notoriety was rare for the era, thus making this wrestling star something of a commodity. Now, who was this wrestler? Well, he was none other than Verne Gagne. Gagne had his sights set on becoming the NWA World Champion after a complicated series of issues with that belt, but that's gonna have to wait till another episode. Anyway, after this, in 1959, Gagne would end up buying Dennis's stake in the Minneapolis Boxing and Wrestling Club and began running it with Carbo. The following year, Verne tried yet again to get an NWA title match with then champion Pat O'Connor, but to no avail. So in response, Gagne and Carbo led several territories in an exodus of the NWA to form the AWA. But still carrying a torch for Pat O'Connor and that NWA World title, Gagne pulled a surprising move when it came to naming the first ever AWA World Champion, as they decided on Pat O'Connor. They gave the still reigning NWA World Champion 90 days to defend his American Wrestling Association Championship. Naturally, the NWA couldn't be bothered with this, and so Pat O'Connor wouldn't wrestle for the AWA until years later. As promised, he was stripped of the belt and Verne Gagne was awarded the championship. Now, just take a second to really think about that. It would be like if Cody Rhodes formed All Elite Wrestling and then named the first AEW champion as Daniel Bryan, and when Daniel Bryan doesn't show up to AEW TV since he's still with WWE, he strips him of the title and says that Daniel's been ducking him and therefore that makes himself the real AEW World Champion. It's actually kind of brilliant when you stop to think about it. Okay, so Gagne's reign officially began on August 16th, 1960, 90 days after the title was first created, which is 3 years prior to Vince McMahon Sr.'s departure from the NWA to form the company that is now known as WWE. During this initial tenure, the American Wrestling Association became wildly successful. Not only were they doing well on their home turf of Minneapolis, but they were also succeeding throughout the Midwest, in cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, and Omaha, not to mention also moving up to Winnipeg. But from here, Manifest Destiny would begin to kick in as the AWA started to move westward to cities such as Denver, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, and San Francisco. This was made possible due to a combination of factors, as Gagne cultivated many solid business relationships with promoters who were struggling at the time. For you see, the NWA wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, as some promotions felt they weren't getting the kind of support that they needed. So, unlike Vince and Kennedy McMahon, Gagne didn't hostilely take over other promotions so much as he forged relationships with those companies that weren't going to stay solvent under the NWA. In addition to this, Verne was also known for running a tight, old-school kind of show, highlighting good old-fashioned technical wrestling as the basis for the AWA. And while that is definitely true to an extent, don't let the hype completely fool you. Verne did prioritize technical wrestling above all else, but he also knew exactly how to use gimmicks and character-based wrestling within a promotion. While Verne did serve as the predominant champion throughout his initial run, he frequently feuded and even lost the title to some pretty gruesome characters, such as the Crusher, Fritz von Erich, and Mad Dog Vachon. Now, that's not to say that these guys couldn't work, so don't get stuck in that binary internet way of thinking that you can only have one thing or another. The point I'm trying to make here is that Gagne knew how to incorporate incorporate wrestling characters and story structure into the entire promotion. He emphasized good, clean technical wrestling as the way of the babyface, even if they did occasionally get overtaken by a gruesome hard-hitting brute, such as Dr. X or Dick the Bruiser. But in the end, it would be the competent technician that would come out on top. Which is not to say that the AWA was nothing more than just Gagne versus beastly heels, because that was definitely not the case, as Gagne also wrestled the likes of Gene Kiniski and Nick Bockwinkel, who we will be getting more into in just a bit. On top of this, he also had a feud with famed British wrestler Billy Robinson, with the two serving as the basis for the film The Wrestler, not the Mickey Rourke one. And when the two of them faced off in Comiskey Park, they drew an outstanding 22,000 fans in attendance. Now that's how you use celebrity to grow an audience. Furthermore, in order to get in the groove for his match with Antonio Inoki, Muhammad Ali wrestled a few matches for the AWA in preparation, which aired on ABC's Wide World of Sport and had the honor of being called by the legendary Howard Cosell. And also, the AWA was the first place that many wrestling fans were first introduced to a wrestler from Grenoble, France, going by the name of Jean Ferret, who would later become known as Andre the Giant. The overall message here is that while Verne Gagne did of course believe in pure wrestling, his ability to understand star power, entertainment, and story are very much undersold. The man knew how to promote and even undermined his own instincts when he decided to put the AWA belt on a young up-and-coming wrestler with a lot of charisma. That wrestler was, of course, Hulk Hogan. After leaving the WWF and Vince McMahon Sr., Hogan would film his role for the movie Rocky III, and then join the AWA, but as a heel. However, his overwhelming charisma quickly turned him face as the fans just loved him. Now, Verne really never saw Hogan as the face to carry the AWA, as he wanted a more tech-savvy wrestler to be the top babyface champion. This reluctance was something that would become a major factor in Hogan's decision moving forward. To make matters worse, Verne also had his sights on grooming another wrestler for the top, his own son Greg, which was not going over well with fans or the locker room, not to mention that Verne himself would also win his 10th AWA title in 1980 while he was in his mid-50s. But despite Verne's desire to have a mechanic as the top babyface champion, Hogan was just so over that it was completely undeniable. So, seeing the business potential, Gagne booked Hogan to begin a feud with AWA champion Nick Bockwinkel and his manager Bobby Heenan. Hogan would go over, winning the American Wrestling Association title, but only for a week. Gagne double-clutched, and as it were, both Hogan and Bockwinkel had used foreign objects throughout the course of their title fight. Therefore, the decision was reversed and Hogan was stripped of the title. And after being told that he wouldn't be getting the belt anytime soon, Hogan would decide to sign with Vince and Ken McMahon as the centerpiece to his brand new WWF. The Hulkster was scheduled to win the World Wrestling Federation World title from the Iron Sheik, who had previously worked with Gagne. Now allegedly, Verne offered the Sheik to legitimately break Hogan's leg, in the career-ending kind of way. Now, obviously, the Iron Sheik didn't go through with this, but it's just interesting to think that that's how close the world came to never even having Hulkamania. Again, allegedly. Now, Hogan wasn't alone in his departure from the AWA, with other talents like Mean Gene Okerlund, Jesse Ventura, Ken Patera, Adrian Adonis, and the aforementioned Bobby the Brain Heenan, among others, all going to the House of McMahon. But despite this talent raid, the AWA actually did pretty well in the rebounding year that followed. It was the year after that where things would begin to crumble. In 1985, Wally Carbo would leave the company, and the AWA would also become a part of the short-lived Pro Wrestling USA, a group of other promotions joining forces in an attempt to go national and compete with the WWF. The highlight of this new conglomerate promotion took place in 1985 with the event called Super Clash, featuring such matches as the Road Warriors vs. the Freebirds for the AWA tag titles, Ric Flair vs. Magnum TA for the NWA Championship, and Rick Martel vs. Stan Hansen for the AWA World title. This was wildly successful, drawing over 20,000 people in attendance. However, this would go bad just as quick as it went good. Following the event, disputes between Verne Gagne and the Crockett's, who were mostly in control of the NWA, led to a severing of the joint venture and the promotion's biggest chance at combating the WWF and going national, which was becoming an absolute must for the industry. But the biggest abomination, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest travesty to ever hit the AWA was of course the unfortunate incident known as the Wrestle Rock Rumble. a rap song featuring AWA talent. Now, some of you might be tempted to look this up, but I'm warning you, don't. In the last years of the AWA, the promotion did work to develop a lot of young talent that would go on to become stars, such as Kurt Hennig, Scott Hall, Big Van Vader, the Nasty Boys, and Marty Jannetty. Not to mention taking a sales and syndication office worker and putting him on wrestling television for the very first time. This office worker was Eric Bischoff. Then, by the late 1980s, the AWA found themselves at a crossroads that way too many wrestling promotions find themselves at when they're on the decline, and that's choose between pushing young, up-and-coming talent that may not be getting the results that they want, or pushing older, more established workers who have proven themselves but are definitely past their prime in the hopes that they can still draw like they used to. Verne teetered with this for a while, first giving longtime AWA star Larry Hennig's son Kurt Hennig the AWA World Championship for over a year, but he wasn't drawing enough to keep the company thriving in the new wrestling landscape. Now, Gagne did toy with the idea of having his son take the belt off a Hennig at house shows, but he never officially went with it. And, based off the responses, Greg wasn't going to be the solution to the AWA's problems, so Verne decided to go in another direction and once again collaborate with the CWA. He had Kurt go against their aging top star, Jerry Lawler, and lose. From there, Kurt would go on to become Mr. Perfect in the WWF. Meanwhile, Lawler and the AWA would make another attempt at collaboration at Superclash 3, with Lawler unifying yet another championship into the fold. However, things did not go nearly as well as they expected, and this new team-up would have to end as well. Lawler would then be stripped of the AWA title, but without getting the physical belt back. Jerry Lawler continued promoting himself as the unified champion, and the AWA had to get a new belt made. Now, the reason behind this was allegedly because Lawler never received any payment. And from here, things would only get worse, as their financial slump worked to alienate talent, which caused them to have to turn to poorly conceived gimmicks in order to try and gain attention. Like having a turkey on a pole match and splitting the roster into thirds for their Team Challenge series. And also during this time, the AWA would move into an empty space as their fan attendance dropped. And in kayfabe reasons, this was said to be done in order to keep interference out. This set has been referred to by fans as the Pink Room of Doom. And finally, what was said to have been the biggest financial blow to the AWA came from Verne Gagne himself, who leveraged money against a property of his which was eventually lost due to eminent domain and became the Lake Minnetonka Regional Park, losing the very financial resource that he was using in order to keep the AWA going. The American Wrestling Association would go inactive in December of 1990, and it would close its doors in the following year. Verne would go on to promote a few unofficial cards in the next couple of years, but a comeback never resulted. Afterwards, Gagne had mentioned that he might go on to promote again someday, but alas, that would never come to be. Well, there you go, the history of the AWA and the mark it left on the professional wrestling industry. What are some of your favorite AWA moments? Let me know down in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a like, and as always, Dave knows.